Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's web seminar on the 2019-20 THP-NMD and THP Plus annual report. My name is Amy Lemley. I'm the Executive Director of John Burton Advocates for Youth, and we are absolutely delighted to host today's web seminar. It's a highlight of our year. So welcome. We're going to jump right in and get started. Next slide, please. All right, as usual, we want to make sure everyone's able to access the information. On the slide, you see the information to participate. We love your questions. Please type them in as you have them, and we'll answer as many as we can when we have our Q&A, which will start promptly at 11:15. Our presentation materials are going to be sent to all registrants, and it will also be posted on our website under Training Archive. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, we have a lot of material to cover. We laugh at John Burton Advocates for Youth that each year this report gets longer, and we really got crazy once we stopped printing this because because we're not printing, that means we can include even more. So we're doing welcome and introductions now. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Simone Turek-Lee, to talk about report methodology. Then the three of us are going to go into a lot of different findings. We will then turn to policy and practice implications, and we will conclude with a question and answer session. Next slide, please. So again, today I'll be presenting. My name is Amy Lemley. I'm the Executive Director of John Burton Advocates for Youth. I'll be joined by Simone Turek-Lee, who's our Director of Housing Health at John Burton Advocates for Youth, and Anna Johnson, our Senior Project Manager at JDay. Next slide. Okay, so here you have it. This is the report. It is available on our website if you'd like to download it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Simone, who is going to get us started.
Thanks, Amy. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So I'm just going to share with you a little bit about how we do this report. Each year we survey the THP-NMD and the THP Plus providers in the state, and that's a huge part of the report. So we do want to just pause here and really thank everyone that completed those surveys for their contributions. We ask a lot of information in the survey, and we get, as you can see, a really high response rate. And we, without that, we wouldn't be able to do this analysis and share this information with all of you. So thanks so much to everyone for your contribution. We also analyze data from the participant tracking systems, which are online databases we manage that providers enter data into. These capture 51% of THP-NMD participants and 68% of THP Plus participants statewide. And then we look at data from the California Child Welfare Indicators Project, specifically about THP-NMD. So we're going to start with an overview of each of the programs. First, we'll start with THP-NMD. So that's the transitional housing placement for non-minor dependents that are in extended foster care. It's a Title IV reimbursable foster care placement. It's been around since late 2012 when extended foster care was implemented, and it was modeled after the THP Plus program. So as of April 1st, 2020, according to the Indicators Project, there were 2,023 non-minor dependents placed in THP-NMD with 58 different organizations that offer the placement located in 49 counties. So I know it's a mouthful, a lot of numbers, but those are kind of those are the stats, an overview of what you're looking at a moment in time and over the fiscal year. So now we're going to move into THP Plus. This is a program, but a program for former foster youth and youth who were formerly in out-of-home probation, ages 18 to 24. Although you'll see later that the program now primarily serves an older subset of youth, 21 to 24. Youth can access THP Plus for up to 24 months, and in counties that offer an extension that's available, youth can access the program for up to 36 months and or up to age 25 if they're enrolled in school. THP Plus was established 19 years ago, I think. 19 years ago, but has really been kind of available and accessible since about 2005. And it was previously a state-funded program with a $34.9 million budget. And then in 2011, that funding was all realigned to the counties. So it's now a county-administered program. So as of the end of the last fiscal year, there were 1,086 youth participating in THP Plus, and the statewide housing capacity was 1,271, and that is the contracted, the total number of slots that THP Plus providers collectively contract with county child welfare agencies to provide, or in some more rare cases that the child welfare agency provides directly at a moment in time. There were 52 organizations collectively operating 73 THP Plus programs across 47 different counties. So now we're going to move into demographics and number of youth served. We're going to get into the kind of more deeper into the findings here. And we're going to start here again with PHPNMD. So growth continues in PHPNMD, but at a slower rate. You can see from the graph the increase in the number of youth participating, as the program kind of ramped up, and then in 2018 things kind of slowed a bit as the state capacity began to level off, but we're still seeing some growth each year. Over time, THPNMD has grown as a more commonly utilized placement for youth, with nearly 1 in 4 non-minor dependents placed in THPNMD as of April 1st, 2020. So this graph shows at the very top, the black numbers are the total number of youth in extended foster care. Then it breaks down that population into 3 categories. The dark blue at the bottom is youth in THPNMD, the orange is youth in supervised independent living placements, and then the light blue are all of the other placements. So you can see, the SILP is the most predominant placement, and then THPNMD comes in second, and then if you saw the light blue broken up, you'd see a collection of other placements. So this slide shows the demographic breakdown of youth in THPNMD as of April 1st. For the most part, the demographics have remained consistent. The only real change has been a 20% increase in the proportion of youth who are Latino and a 31% decrease in the proportion of youth who are white. So now we're moving over to THP Plus in the demographics and numbers served findings. So while slightly lower, the number of youth participating served over 12 months and the overall capacity of the program remains consistent with the previous year. But 9% fewer youth were participating in THP Plus on June 30th, 2020 as compared to the year prior. And really what we've come to understand is that this is due to allowing youth to remain in extended foster care who turned 21, which was part of a COVID response included in our state budget. And so it's temporarily slowed entrance into THP Plus, but I do think we'll see this kind of revert back to normal on July 1st, 2021, when that extension expires. So despite THP Plus being realigned from the state to the counties in 2011, the program remains strong with just an 8% decrease since 2011. This graph shows the contracted number of THP Plus slots over the fiscal year. So more than half of the counties in California with programs provide that 3rd-year extension that I mentioned. If you're in school in one of these counties in THP Plus, you can participate for an additional 12 months and or up until age 25. So 27 counties that collectively have 70% of the statewide THP Plus capacity offer that extension, and you can see the list of counties there on the slide. So this slide shows the demographic breakdown of youth participating in THP Plus at entrance to the program for the last several fiscal years. There's been an increase in older youth, and the chart doesn't go back, further enough maybe to see this, but pre-extended foster care, that proportion of older youth was even smaller, and now we're looking at them making up 98% of the population. There's been a 43% increase in youth identifying as LGBTQ since 2012-13, and youth identifying as multiracial and as Hispanic, we've also seen increases. The most notable decrease is in the proportion of youth who were previously supervised by juvenile probation. So now we're going to move into looking at, talking about money. We're going to talk about the rates that are paid to providers and how this may differ across programs, between the two programs. So again, we'll start with THPNMD. The statewide THPNMD foster care rate increased by 4% as required by statute. This is a statewide foster care rate, and so it gets that annual California Necessities Index increase. One county, Orange, actually supplements the single site rate paid to THPNMD providers with $531, so it brings their rate to $4,005. But for the most part across the state, you're looking at the rates on the screen being what counties are paying to providers to operate this foster care placement. So now we're on THP Plus. So here we look at the average rate. So the THP Plus rate is paid by the county, and it's set at the county level, not the state level. Every county has a different rate, and the average monthly rate paid by counties to THP Plus providers for the scattered site housing model has increased just slightly from the previous year, while the average rate for the single site and host family models have decreased. And we use a weighted average here if you're wondering that. So THP Plus rates continue to vary across the state. You can see on the screen there's a huge range between what's paid in some counties compared to others. And that makes sense. The cost of housing varies so much across the state, but you're looking at upwards of $4,000 in some counties, and then in others in the 1,000s. Two counties do offer a higher rate for youth who are custodial parents. That's San Mateo and Santa Clara. San Mateo offers $3,626 to providers to house and serve parenting youth and their children, and that's $480 more than their standard rate. And then Santa Clara offers $2,800, which is $400 more than their standard rate. Since 2012-13, the THPNMD rate has grown twice as fast as the average THP Plus rate. So the THPNMD rate has grown 24%. The average THP Plus rate has grown 11%. So we see that those CNI increases that the THPNMD rate does make a difference. But with THP Plus, it really varies. Some counties look at their rate annually and make increases. Others have not changed it in years. So this is on average. A common theme that's often, what we hear that comes up a lot is that the cost of housing is so great in some counties, and it's increased so much in the last several years that it's really, neither rate has kept pace with that. Luckily, that was addressed for THPNMD in our last budget with the establishment of a housing supplement, but we're still looking at the THP Plus rate being challenging with the THP Plus rate. So now we're going to move into housing entrance and exit. So we started collecting data from providers on the number of youth on their waiting list a few years ago. So it's interesting now to kind of look back and see how those figures have changed. The number of youth waiting for THPNMD has more than doubled since 2018, with 482 youth on the waiting list as of June 30th, 2020. The number of youth waiting for THP Plus has decreased by 15% from the previous year, with 539 youth on the waiting list as of June 30th, 2020. But you'll see it has increased since 2018. And I want to share, we believe this THP Plus being down on waiting lists a little bit is attributable to that extended foster care extension. And I do believe it will go back up in July. In THPNMD, LA, Alameda, and San Bernardino had the longest waiting list. For THP Plus, it was Kern, LA, and Contra Costa. And if you're curious to see by county, how long the waiting list is as reported by providers and a couple of counties, you can look at the appendix in the report. I'm looking, there's a question about whether we can send out the presentation, and my apologies, I should have said that in the beginning. The presentation is attached as a handout on the control panel. So if you go to the handout section and you can look there, you should be able to download a version of it. So apologies for keeping that a secret. So there's no statewide requirement regarding utilization or management of waiting lists for THPNMD or THP Plus, and so this really results in great variation in whether and how waiting lists are maintained. So kind of you can see on the screen, there's a number of practices, but it just really varies between providers and between counties as to whether they maintain one, how long youth remain on the list, et cetera. So in addition to demand among eligible youth, there's also demand for THP Plus among youth who exited foster care prior to turning 18. So providers report that former foster youth in need of housing continue to attempt to access their THP Plus programs, but they aren't eligible under current THP Plus eligibility criteria. That eligibility criteria requires youth to have been in foster care on their 18th birthday. And so of the state's 73 THP Plus programs, over half reported that they had collectively denied approximately 170 youth admission to the program because they exited foster care before turning 18. And then of those youth, approximately 111 of them exited after turning 16, meaning they were just 1 to 2 years shy of meeting THP Plus eligibility requirements. And because many providers don't gather this level of information about the youth that they don't serve in their program, this is, an underreporting, we believe, of the data. And someone's asking also about the recording. We are recording this. This will be posted on our website, and we'll share that URL with you at the end of the presentation. So here, the remote scattered site model is the most prevalent housing model in both THP-NMD and THP Plus. It accounts for 85% in THP-NMD and 72% in THP Plus. The second most common housing model was the single site model, which in THP-NMD is a staffed model, and it accounts for 13% of their housing slots, and then 21% for THP Plus, where it's not staffed. The host family model accounts for just 2% of THP-NMD and 7% of THP Plus housing slots statewide. So let's unpack this slide a little bit. The chart shows the various types of living settings that youth were living in just prior to entering the program, and then the living settings where they moved to directly after exiting the program. So for THP-NMD, youth were most likely to enter the program directly from a family-based foster care setting or from congregate care. And then they were most likely to exit to living with a relative or another person in stable housing where they're not paying rent. For THP Plus, youth were most likely to enter from and exit to renting their own or shared housing where they are paying rent. And then lastly, more youth entered THP Plus from unstable housing or homelessness than THP-NMD. And this data here on the screen looks at youth who exited the program over the last fiscal year, but we'll also later in the presentation look at youth who entered the program over the fiscal year and their experiences of homelessness. And so you'll see this kind of show up with a different cohort later in the presentation. So this slide looks at the average length of time that you spend in either program. The charts compare that to the amount of time youth are able to participate in either program. So you can see the average length of stay has increased in both programs, but remains well below the maximum program duration. In THP-NMD, youth on average access the program for 14.27 months, and in THP Plus for 16.7 months. So this slide examines the rate of exits from the program that are involuntary. So this would be youth being discharged from the program, due to maybe program non-compliance. In both programs, this rate has decreased since the previous fiscal year, with nearly 1 in 3 youth in THP-NMD and nearly 1 in 4 youth in THP Plus leaving the program involuntarily over fiscal year 2019-20. And you can see for THP Plus, this figure has gone from 36% in 2016-17 down to 24% in 2019-20. That's a significant change there. So each year we ask standard questions on the survey, and then we always have a few new different questions that we ask and that are special and specific to the current year. So this year, for example, we asked about the impact of COVID-19, obviously, and you'll hear about that a little later, but we also asked about the transition supports that providers offer to youth in terms of helping them exit to stable housing. We found the majority of providers offer a range of supports. I won't read them all on the screen there, but you can see a high number of providers offer, assistance with youth trying to access some form of stable housing or assisted housing as they're exiting the program. We also asked about providers' relationship with the local homeless continuum of care. So 1 in 3 THP Plus programs are operated by an organization that's a member of their local homeless continuum of care. And when we say homeless continuum of care, we're referring to the entity that's responsible for administering federal HUD funding. And so, in some cases there is a stronger relationship, in other cases not as much. But you can see in the charts kind of the different level of engagement. Maybe the organization is a member, all the way down to they have no relationship. Additionally, nearly 4 in 10 THP Plus programs survey respondents indicated that their organization actually operates a program for homeless youth or adults funded through a contract with their local continuum of care. So now I'm going to turn it over to Anna Johnson, and she's going to jump into findings about education, employment, and income.
Thank you, Simone. I'm happy to cover this if you want to go to the next slide. All right, this slide shows the percentage of youth who have earned their high school diploma, GED equivalent or higher. And you can see youth are moving the needle on high school completion between entrance and exit from 68 to 83% for THP-NMD and 85 to 87% for THP Plus. Next slide. This shows youth educational status looking at post-secondary attainment. And the previous slide shows most youth finishing high school, but here we see more than half in either program are not yet attending college. As you can see for THP-NMD, youth are enrolling, 26% attending a 2-year college, but that does not improve by exit. Students you do see are dropping out. We start at 4% having dropped out or withdrew, and it increases to 20% in THP-NMD. So this is a big issue. We see a little degree, certificate, or license attainment by the time they leave the program in both THP-NMD and THP Plus. And this is critical for sustaining a living wage in California. Next slide. So here this shows employment rates at entrance and exit to programs. For THP-NMD participants, you're seeing experienced gains in employment from 31% at entrance to 45% at exit. And for THP Plus participants, we're not seeing those gains, but when you look at the comparison here, it is not that fewer were employed at exit, it was that they started being better employed. So I'll point out that here you're not yet seeing in this chart the impact of COVID-19. This is youth who exited over the 2019-2020 year, where half occurred during the pandemic and half did not. And they certainly didn't enter during the pandemic. So you'll see that impact actually in next year's report. Next slide. This shows employed youth hourly wage at entrance and exit. So you see youth are receiving a small increase in wages, but at exit this is not sufficient for a living wage, with just really very close to the California state minimum wage here. Next slide. This shows youth's annual income, which across the board is quite low. Most youth here would qualify for public benefit programs and can use support in navigating the systems and benefits based on their annual earnings that you see here. The average wage of youth multiplied by the average number each week is how these numbers were calculated. So again, these are estimates. And I think everyone understands that, again, to be able to earn a living wage and sort of transition to independence, we would be seeking higher annual earnings for youth and looking at how to support that total income. So the next slide. This slide shows the percentage of youth receiving public benefits, which again can increase that total annual amount of money that youth can have to sustain their expenses. And so what we are seeing from this report is that there's been a fourfold increase in access to public benefits for youth in THP-NMD, and an increase from 24 to 30% for youth in THP Plus programs. So we know most youth here are eligible for public benefits from the previous slide based on income. And just a reminder that youth in THP Plus can access all of the benefits listed on this slide. Oh, yes?
Anna, can you hear me? Sounds like, I'm not sure if other people are hearing this, but it sounds like you're going in and out. Can people let me know if they're also hearing that? Or if it's just me. If it's just me, no problem.
Okay, one second.
Oh, no.
How is this?
Oh, everybody says it's, well, some people say it's fine, some people say it's uneven. Maybe we'll proceed and see if it fixes itself.
So Simone, you're breaking up now too. I don't know if you can hear me, but why don't we both go on pause and give Anna a chance to talk again.
Sounds like I may be having audio and trouble because I can't hear what Amy's saying. Sounds like there might be a connection issue here. Let's, can one of you try talking again? People are saying no one's breaking up for me. Should I call back in? And it sounds good on their end, so I guess we should continue. Anna, can you try talking again?
Well, why don't we just keep going, and you want to pick up from the impact of COVID-19, and I'll take it over as scheduled. How does that sound?
Sure. I just want to Anna, I just want to see, can we hear you or no? Okay. So let's move on from, so this slide, kind of where Anna left off, this shows the percentage of youth who were receiving public benefits at entrance to the program and then at exit to the program. So you can see there's an increase in THP-NMD, the proportion of youth accessing public benefits, a more than fourfold increase from 6% at entrance to 27% at exit. And we also see a smaller increase in THP Plus. You can see more youth enter THP Plus receiving those benefits. And if you're wondering what those benefits are, so for THP-NMD, it's SSI or SSDI, CalFresh, WIC, or subsidized childcare. For THP Plus, it's all of those things on the screen. So the ones I mentioned in addition to GA and CalWORK. So it's if they're receiving, one or more of those benefits. So
Simone, can you hear me again?
I can. So I will pass it back over to you.
Is it choppy? I'm so sorry.
Not right now.
Sorry. Okay.
Go right ahead.
So now we will talk about the impact of COVID-19, which is such a big factor in people's experience this year. So it was included in the survey and comparatively looked at the participant tracking system data. We asked providers to tell us how many youth graduated high school in 2020 who then did not continue to participate in post-secondary in the fall of 2020 due to COVID-19, and also for those in college. So you can see here some educational drop-off due to COVID-19 and decreases in enrollment from the spring to the fall. So here we see 2 in 5 youth in THP-NMD who graduated did not enroll in post-secondary education in the fall. Next slide. This slide shows the impact COVID-19 has had on youth employment. You see here how many were employed, then lost jobs or lost hours due to COVID-19 and the pandemic. Employment was impacted pretty severely here. It's a powerful finding. Nearly 4 out of 5 in THP-NMD and 3 out of 5 in THP Plus experienced job loss or reduction in hours. Next slide. Now you're looking at the participant tracking system data. This slide compares youth employment in the midst of the pandemic to a year ago prior to the pandemic. And what you see is a drop from 18 and 23% compared to June of the prior year for THP-NMD and THP Plus. So again, a significant difference. Next slide. This slide shows a slight increase in public benefits access due to COVID-19. The proportion increased slightly from 17 to 21% in the THPNMD population and 31 to 36% in THP Plus, so a slight increase. And now I'll hand it over to Amy, who will talk about health and well-being.
Thank you very much. Next slide, please. Each year we ask certain questions around the experience of young people having access to health care. And we're happy to report that this is one area where we're certainly succeeding. All youth in THP Plus were enrolled in health insurance upon exit from the program. In terms of the accessing of different services, 1 in 4 young people in THPNMD and 1 in 5 young people in THP Plus were receiving services for mental, physical, learning, or developmental disabilities exit from the program. So that gives you a little bit of a window into who the programs are serving and the access to services that providers are making possible. Next slide, please. We have a lot of interest, as do all of the people on this web seminar, on young parents, expectant and parenting youth. And on the slide here, you can see the kind of parenting status of young people enter the program, exiting the program. It does in terms of female participants, 10% custodial parents at the program to 21%. And then
your audio, I think, has some sort of connection. Can let me know, can you hear me when I talk?
Are you having trouble? If you can let me know if you're having trouble hearing me, I will. Okay, I'm going to keep going unless I hear otherwise.
I think it sounds good, Amy. It was choppy, but now you sound okay.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, everybody.
It wouldn't be 2020 if we didn't have some tech problems, right? When will this year end? But back to the report. But what we do want to offer some context is, while these numbers are quite large, they're actually not as large as they used to be. It used to be upwards of 50%. So we want to accurately represent what's happening in these programs, but it's also important to have a larger context that overall we are seeing a decrease in young people becoming custodial parents. So next slide, please. This is a question
unfortunately, we're only catching little bits of what you're saying. Can you hear me? If it's all three, people are unable. Can you hear when I'm a bit choppy? This is no.
So Simone, we
can't.
can't.
People are saying they can hear.
To help us on the out. Definitely some audio problems. Simone.
Let's.
Okay.
Okay.
Back in.
How is
on the road? We're ahead. So
I'm only hearing choppiness of what. Too many people on GoToWebinar in the world right now, I think. The only thing I can think to do is to restart. I don't know if that's the correct thing to do here, but I think if nobody can hear us,
I can hear you clearly at the moment, Simone.
You can. Okay. Oh, now everyone says it's clear. Okay, Amy, go ahead. Let's give it another try.
Okay, so this is Amy. I just rejoined the web seminar. Simone or Anna, if you could let me know whether I'm audible, I'd really appreciate it.
At first, we could hear you, and then it just started getting choppy.
Okay, can you hear me now?
It is choppy. Why don't you try? Now people are saying they can hear you. Let's just keep trying to proceed and see if it can work itself out, hopefully.
Okay. All right, so if you can go to the next slide. All right, so here we have information about the number of young people who are participating in the program. We think about the program as one for transition age youth, but as you can see, there are a total of 657 young children, minor children, who are participating in the two programs. 341 young people or children live with custodial parents in THP-NMD, and 316 children live with their parents in THP Plus. The presentation at the bottom of the screen shows the distribution of their ages. As you can see, most of the young people in both programs are 1 to 3 years old. We do have a number of infants, particularly in THP-NMD, very young children. Half of them are under 1 year old. And then the balance is 4 years and older. For THP-NMD, that's just 4%, and that makes sense given the younger age of the participants. In THP Plus, however, it's 1 in 5 young people is 4 years and older. So that's really squarely preschool time. So you really see the range of needs of the participants.
Can you hear me?
And yes, I can hear you. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. It sounds like Anna can hear clearly.
They're saying they can.
Yeah, can you go to the next slide?
The hard part. I can hear now.
Okay, great. So if you turn to the next slide, we're going to look at expectant mothers in THP-NMD and THP Plus. All right, if we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So this is one of those questions, a new question that we added this year. We were curious about the relationship between home visitation programs and expectant young people. We know there's some very innovative work happening around the state, particularly in Los Angeles, to make sure that all young people who are going to become custodial parents receive a referral for a nurse-family partnership. And so we were curious about the extent statewide, and what you have here is what we found. Unfortunately, most young people in both of these programs are not receiving services from a home visitation program. So there's an opportunity here for sure to make those connections. You can see that 35% of expectant mothers in THP-NMD and 47% were referred. So, about half in Plus and about a third in NMD were at least referred. 24% of expectant mothers in either program received services. And interestingly, 18% of first-time mothers in THP-NMD and 13% in THP Plus received services. So we have room to grow, shall we say, in so that we can make sure that young people receive access to this very important program. And, we did this kind of in preparation for the implementation of the Family First Prevention Services Act, which will make newly available federal funding available for expectant and parenting youth. So we'll do more thinking and investigating and learning about how different programs are linking with nurse-family partnerships around this, or nurse-family partnership and other home visitation programs around the state. Okay, Anna, next slide, please. We also look very deeply into the experience of homelessness, both immediately prior to entering the program and at any time before entering the program. And so, as you can see here, unfortunately, close to 1 in 4 youth experienced homelessness while in foster care prior to entering THP-NMD. So 1 in 4 are having an episode of homelessness, which is, extremely high-risk activity, something we want to avoid at all costs. We know the research shows that even a night of homelessness puts young people in particular at a very high risk for trauma. We know 10% are entering THP-NMD directly from homelessness, so directly from an emergency shelter, homelessness, or other unstable housing. So that paints a picture. Unfortunately, the good news is, we're down from that high of 26, but it's not like this is anything new, but we're not moving the dial on this. We're not improving it, that's for sure. Next slide, please. This looks at THP Plus, and it's essentially the similar trend, but worse outcomes. So we see 33%, almost 1 in 3 have an episode of homelessness between foster care and THP Plus. So there is a kind of a lapse in that transition. Maybe it's a young person who's trying independent housing, and then something happens. A lot of different circumstances. And a full 16% are entering directly from those more crisis housing situations. So something that's really very, very troubling, and something that we all want to improve. So we're going to pivot here, and we're going to turn to policy actions. And just want to say thanks to everyone, despite these epic technical problems, for hanging in there. I think a year ago I would have been completely beside myself, but now it almost seems like, given the state of the world, I feel like I can't be fazed. But we're going to do our best to go into these. And we really encourage everyone to feel that these are for you. We have used this report to identify these policy and practice implications, but we're offering them up to you to take action on. There are certain ones of these we hope to take action on, but they're really, we want you to think of them as yours to either take action on in your county if you're another advocate who's kind of proposing something on a state level, your state agency. There's something we want to offer up. So our first set of recommendations, if you could advance the slide, please, Anna. It looks like she cannot even know when to change the slide. So,
hang on. Amy, if you give me 1 second, I'm going to make myself the presenter. This will just take 1 second.
Okay, thanks.
Amy, can you see this? Is it working? Now I can't hear.
Can people hear me? This is Simone talking, and
I can hear you, Simone. It's Amy. Can you hear me?
I can. It sounds like people I don't know what's going on with technology right now, but people are saying they can't hear you talking. Oh, now they can hear you talking. Great. Okay.
Okay, great.
Let's proceed.
Well, I just logged off and re-logged on. We're going to march this baby out no matter what. So
yeah,
I keep going with this slide. Okay.
It sounds like normal sound now, so that's good news.
Okay, great. Well, and the good news is this is all in the presentation. So, the first recommendation we have for the legislature is to eliminate the suspension of the $8 million transitional housing program. This was a fabulous investment made by the California State Legislature. We were delighted. It's being directed to child welfare agencies around the state. And actually, you just went past that. So thank you. It's just amazing. We have such a wonderful, dedicated legislature and governor that cares so much about our young people. However, there is a suspension. It is supposed to suspend in December 31st, 2021. Our recommendation is, given the 539 youth on the waiting list and many more who aren't able to access THP Plus because they weren't in care at 18, our recommendation is now is not the time to eliminate that funding. Okay, next slide, please. The next recommendation we have is to require in state law that county social workers must assist youth with identifying housing for their supervised independent living placement if they are currently homeless or housing insecure. So we know from this data that young people are experiencing homelessness. 1 in 4 experienced homelessness while in foster care prior to entering THP-NMD. It's not everyone, but we really have a little bit of a loop to close. Right now, if a young person wants to live in a supervised independent living placement, it is, the ACL that governs that specifies that the youth identifies the setting. However, this data and other data really suggest that there may be a need for a little bit more assistance. And this isn't that, again, people don't care. They certainly do. It's more that it's falling through the cracks, not in a dissimilar way to many years ago prior to the screening for potential SSI eligibility. So we want to make sure that young people, if they are housing insecure or homeless, that we know that we identify that, and that they are referred to the resources that are available. So the next slide, please. The next recommendation for the legislature to consider is to consider extending extended foster care past June 30th, 2021, if the economic and public health conditions do not improve. We're not there yet. We're not going to pretend like we're there yet. But this report certainly brought out some areas of concern in terms of what young people are experiencing. We know there is a massive employment problem. 4 out of 5 youth and 3 out of 5 youth in THP Plus have experienced a job loss or reduction in hours. And so we are encouraging the legislature to keep their minds open. Just as a parent who is continuing to offer that material and emotional support for an adult child that is returned to live in their home, if the conditions indicate that is necessary, we're encouraging, based on the data in this report, to be open to that. Next slide, please. Our next recommendation for the legislature is to really revisit some eligibility criteria, specifically for the THP Plus program and the Next Up program. So both of these are really strong programs, and when they were established, the eligibility criteria made a lot of sense. So when THP Plus was established, if you were in care at 18, then you could participate. And when Next Up was established, which is a campus support program at 45 community college campuses, if you were in care at 16, you could participate. The world has changed significantly since both of these programs were established. And so we really want to migrate away from this kind of winner-take-all eligibility criteria framework. We know many young people who do exit to guardianship, adoption, and reunification prior to 18 do experience housing insecurity or homeless later in their life. We know that from the evidence in this report. We also know for next step, by having 16 be that age eligibility, we're not in alignment with the larger criteria that governs financial aid, which is age 13. And if a young person was in care on or after 13, they're considered an eligible student. So, these are, this is really, again, trying to broaden these modestly to align better with the experiences of young people. And this is feedback we consistently get from young people, that they go to access services and they weren't kind of foster youth at the right moment. They may have very extensive histories of trauma. They may have been in care for a long time. But because at that specific moment, they didn't have the right dependency status. So this is something for the legislature to consider. Next slide, please. All right. The other one is really, our recommendation based on the findings of this report are that we want to make sure that the needs of homeless youth are included in any homelessness response that California proceeds with. We're delighted that they have been. For the last 3 years, the legislature has put funding towards homelessness, and for the last 3 years, they have created a set-aside for youth. It was 5% of the HEAP program, and for the last 2 years, it's been 8%. And so we just strongly encourage the legislature to continue to take that approach. And the reason why is because of exactly these findings in this report. We know young people who don't meet these narrow eligibility criteria exist, and yet we know they need help. And we also know that the stronger, a larger safety net for young people is we will be able to serve young people who spent some time in foster care but weren't in foster care during the specific time required by eligibility. So again, we're delighted the legislature and the governor have done this, and we're encouraging this kind of more holistic approach moving forward. Next slide, please. So the next recommendation we have is really looking at when young people go to higher education. I think probably the finding in this report that made my stomach drop, and there's a lot in here that is troubling, but certainly seeing the rate of young people dropping out. It's so exciting to see young people enrolling in college. And yet once they enroll, we see they're not being retained. There's a lot of reasons for that, but we believe establishing funding for basic needs centers at California community colleges is one practical step that could be taken that could really help address this. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the basic needs center movement that has been growing over the last kind of 10 years in California. And it is a way of ensuring that we kind of go beyond the narrow scope of post-secondary education, which is more focused on, research and instruction, and saying we can't really offer equitable access to higher education if we're not thinking whether students are hungry and homeless. And so this is a recommendation we are making. We would like it to be considered. We believe it would offer tremendous support both for foster youth narrowly, as well as the much broader population of young people who touch that system, but again, may not be in care during that one moment that makes them eligible for extended foster care, THP Plus, or some of these other programs. Next slide, please. So I think the next recommendation we have is really looking more deeply about reproductive and sexual health care in foster youth. Again, we know from this report that 1 in 4 young people are custodial mothers at exit. We don't really have any information about this currently at a state level. We do this little report, and frankly, it's a subset of a subset. It's about non-minor dependents who are in one foster care placement. But we can't really say almost anything about these young people over time and systematically. And we believe, given the value and the opportunity to support these young families, there's a strong case to be made to really looking at that information regularly, looking at the health and well-being of them when they are pregnant, looking at their access to prenatal care, looking at the health of their births, looking at the health of their young children, and really embracing this responsibility in a way that I think that before we had extended foster care, there really weren't that many young people who were parenting. Again, we know how many there are in THP-NMD. We also know how many there are statewide due to the new requirements to collect that data, which is really just around 1,000 statewide. So not a huge number, but yet a really exciting number to be able to support in their journey as young families. Next slide, please. And then the last one I will cover before I hand it off, is establishing a prenatal benefit. Again, I see your little thing going. You're almost there. Thank you. And so this is something that was explored earlier in 2017 when the infant supplement was increased. But again, we know there are many young people in expectant parenting use in both of these programs. Unfortunately, we know from the Cal Youth Study and other studies that many young people are not getting the prenatal care that they need. And so this concept of a prenatal benefit is one that we're encouraging the legislature to revisit. There's a reason why it's offered in CalWORKs. If you apply for CalWORKs, you can get that benefit prior to the birth of the child. And that's really because all of the public health data shows that, we want healthy births. We want well-supported pregnant women. And that's one reason why, once again, LA County moved ahead and piloted this approach. And so they've established the early infant supplement, and that's for young people who are in their 7th, 8th, or 9th month of pregnancy. They provide a $415 supplemental payment, and they have a whole bunch of policies wrapped around that. So we feel like, that's great. LA County has done that. We think there's a strong case, given the number of expectant parenting youth in the state and the number of them specifically in THP-NMD, that this is something that the legislature could consider broadening and making available for young people across the state. All right, so that's the end of my recommendations, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I just want to do a quick sound check. Are people able to hear me? This is Simone.
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Okay, sorry about the tech problems earlier. So I'm going to talk about recommendations for state agencies. So the first few recommendations are for the California Department of Social Services. So this one is establish a minimum standard for THP Plus rates in statute. So I shared earlier in the presentation, the average THP Plus rates haven't kept pace with the rising housing costs in California. And the average rate's only really grown 11% since 2012-13. So this recommendation it just suggests amending what's in statute now, which there's currently kind of an archaic formula in it that ties the rate to a foster care placement that's being phased out, group homes, and it actually isn't really so much followed at this point either. So it would be changing this kind of archaic formula in statute to one that is current and that establishes a minimum rate. There was an opportunity to do this. The state was required in a bill by end of last year to make changes to the formula for the THP Plus rate, and so it's an opportunity really to ensure the program can sustain itself and retain its quality and its service level by establishing a minimum. So not to take away the regional differences; those are great. Those are based on they should be based on the differences in cost of living, but to establish just some sort of minimum to keep quality and service level at a fair place. Next slide. So this one is establish a statewide standard for county utilization and management of THP-NMD waiting lists. So I talked about waiting list management and utilization earlier kind of being all over the place. And, you know, the THP-NMD waiting list has more than doubled in the last year, or in the last 2 years, excuse me. And the waiting list is a really, it's an important tool for understanding need, but you know, it's a better tool. You know, the better we do at managing and standardizing it, the better grip we have on what that statewide need is. And it can really actually, I think, be an important tool for fulfilling a new requirement that's in legislation that just passed, AB 1979. It requires counties to evaluate their placement resources and programs in relation to the needs of NMDs, and then to examine its ability to meet their emergency housing needs. And so I think, you know, having a THP-NMD waiting list, some sort of standard, would be a helpful way of getting at that need. Next slide. Thank you. So this one is prioritize timely implementation of the THP-NMD housing supplement. So $4 million was included in the fiscal year 2021 state budget to provide a housing supplement to THP-NMD rates to better align with rising housing costs. This is currently being implemented on a phased-in basis starting in July 2021. We're thrilled to see that the ACL just went out notifying counties and the automation systems about this new policy, and it's right on track. So we're looking forward to seeing this continue to be prioritized. It seems to be doing great so far, and you know, given the high demand for housing and really the challenges presented by our current economic conditions, we hope to continue to see it prioritized. Next slide. So expedite the issuance of the new THP-NMD licensing standards. So you heard earlier, there was a 5-fold increase in the number of youth in THP-NMD that withdrew from college between program entrance and exit, kind of as Amy was also just kind of referencing. And, you know, while support with post-secondary education is a required supportive service in THP-NMD, really the type and the intensity of support varies so much across the state, across providers, across counties, and it's really not specified or really robust enough in the governing standards. And so in 2018, DSS convened a work group to make recommendations to the licensing standards for the placement. And so in the amended regulations are, you know, more, they specify now the support that should be provided in a number of areas related to post-secondary education. And so, as many of you probably know, the regulatory process can take a really long time. And so we're hoping the release of these new regulations can be expedited. Next slide. So now we have 2 recommendations for the California Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. This first one is about the Department of Housing and Community Development within that agency, and then the one after that will be about a different department within the agency. So this has immediately dispersed the $8 million transitional housing program funding. So this $8 million was, I think as referenced earlier, administered by the Department of Housing and Community Development within the agency, and was included in the fiscal year 1920 state budget. It's taking a long time to get out. So as of November 1st, county child welfare agencies have not received their disbursement. And so understanding kind of where we are with the waiting list for THP Plus, where we are with COVID-19, where we are with homelessness, we think that there's a very, you know, critical need for this funding to reach the child welfare agencies and get the dollars onto the street and serving young people. So we want to see that happen as quickly as possible. Next slide. So this last recommendation is for the Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council. So it's very exciting. There's the recommendation is include foster care data in the from the Department of Social Services in the second phase of development of the Homeless Data Integration System. So this is a new data system that's being developed by the Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council, and it's a great opportunity to see some crossover with foster care data. So the HCFC is looking at the second phase where they are going to potentially be data sharing with other state departments. And so, given the high rate of homelessness among former foster youth, I think they'll want to, include data, client data from foster care data from DSS. So now I'm going to pass it over to Anna for recommendations for counties and providers.
Thanks, everyone. Here we are in our last section of the presentation. So the recommendation here is to, it's really for counties to work with THP Plus providers and to set county THP Plus rates according to the local cost of housing and service provision. So as was mentioned earlier in the presentation, there's a lot of regional variation, both in the rates and in the cost of housing and services. And counties should really look to the providers, look at the real true cost today, and take local minimum wage ordinances into account and the cost of renting an apartment. One tool that can be used to do that is HUD's fair market rent, which does calculate the local cost of housing, and use that as a tool to consult with providers about that true cost and make sure to really sustain that program as we continue to see housing costs rise. Next, this recommendation is to offer a higher THP Plus rate for youth who are custodial parents. The cost of serving parenting youth and their children are higher as far as the services, the household supplies, and larger housing accommodations that are needed. And as was mentioned earlier, 2 counties do provide a parenting rate, so San Mateo and Santa Clara County, and would like to see that practice replicated across the state for our custodial parents to have them be able to start their family well supported. This recommendation is to increase the total number of THPNMD housing slots utilizing counties where there is a waiting list. So the waiting list, as Simone mentioned earlier, is provided in the annual report by county. The number of youth on that waiting list has increased 41% between 2019 and 2020, with just under about 500 youth that are waiting for housing. And this really is the only viable alternative for many youth who have not passed a SILT readiness assessment. And providers and counties can work together to overcome some of these common barriers you see here with contracting, finding appropriate housing that's affordable, and increasing capacity of providers. This next recommendation is for THP Plus, and the recommendation is to extend THP Plus for youth regardless of age or program duration, which was authorized in this year's state budget. So again, in this previous state budget, as a response to COVID-19, the legislature worked to make sure it was clear that counties were authorized to allow youth to remain in THP Plus regardless of their age, eligibility, or program duration through June 30th of 2021. So we did not want youth exiting during a pandemic into a really difficult employment and housing market without that type of support to really stabilize and shelter in place. And because youth are not exiting from THPNMD in foster care at age 21, similarly because of the efforts of the legislature, this is an extension that can be implemented and providers can allow their participants to remain in place without added cost or slots to the program. So again, just the importance of supporting youth who have experienced reductions in employment and other services during this recession. This next recommendation is to fully implement the provisions included in the state budget to allow youth to remain in foster care after age 21 and provide flexibility related to participation conditions for THPNMD. The legislature, as we mentioned earlier, did support youth in ensuring that they could shelter in place, they stabilized and not exit during the pandemic. Several counties were waiting for the release of state guidance to properly or fully implement that policy. There was nearly a 4-month delay in the guidance, but that guidance is now out and available. It was in our most recent newsletter, and it's online at the California Department of Social Services website, and you can see the guidance and how to fully implement that. And the recommendation here is to support youth at least through June 30th, 2021, and for the legislature to potentially consider extending that if needed. So the next recommendation is to utilize the $5 million Housing Navigation Program allocation appropriated in the 2020-21 state budget, which is funding that counties can receive to assist NMDs who are housing insecure or experiencing homelessness. So this funding is allocated to county child welfare agencies for the support of housing navigators to help young adults secure housing in this very difficult housing market. That funding was not yet dispersed to counties and was then again appropriated in the most recent state budget. But once that money is dispersed, county child welfare agencies can utilize that to assist non-minor dependents who are needing that support, as you saw earlier, those who are coming from shelter, experiencing homelessness, or at risk. This recommendation is to implement the SB 1252 THP Plus extension for youth in school as it was intended. So Senate Bill 1252 allows youth in THP Plus to remain in the program for an additional 12 months and up to age 25 if they're enrolled in school and post-secondary. 27 counties are currently offering that extension of THP Plus. Now, some counties that have opted into that have been following the guidance correctly for everyone, and some have been sort of doing a case-by-case basis or have some additional requirements that have been screening out some youth from being able to fully participate in that. But this is so important, as we saw earlier, with the need for degree, certificate, or license attainment. And to be able to earn a living wage in California, we really need youth to be supported in their housing while they're attending school so that they can really complete their efforts and transition to independence with that degree. This next recommendation is to establish a formal partnership with a home visitation program for new expectant mothers, such as Nurse Family Partnership, for expectant and parenting foster youth. So parenting youth in PHPNMD and THP Plus collectively have 657 children who are living with them as of June 30th. So only 1 in 3 in THPNMD and less than half of youth in THP Plus were actually referred to a home visitation program during their pregnancy, and less than 1 in 4 actually attained or received those services. The home visitation is an evidence-based model that really does have a huge impact and sustained effects on child and maternal outcomes, and we would really like to see our foster youth be connected with those programs that really can help them, again, start their family off with support and with that information that they need to raise their child and be healthy. This next recommendation is to ensure probation officers who work with non-minor dependents on their caseload have access to information about local housing resources for youth transitioning out of care. So currently, what we're seeing is that the proportion of youth in THP Plus who are formally supervised by the probation system has decreased from 15% to 9% over the last 7 years. So this is something to be curious about. We can explore more why that might be. We don't know exactly why that is, but it is something to look at. What we're recommending here is that making sure probation officers are familiar with the THP Plus programs that are available, the housing vouchers that youth can access, and the programs through local homelessness response system. If probation officers have that, it will definitely make sure that non-minor dependents are connecting with those housing support programs that they need as they transition out of care. Just a couple more here. I know we're at 11:15. And it actually is saying my screen sharing is paused. Can anyone see the screen anymore?
I can see the screen. It's just paused on that slide. Why don't we, I'm going to say we can probably skip the next couple of recommendations. People can read them in the report, and maybe we just move into Q&A. There was only just a couple more. And that way we have our full 15 minutes for Q&A, if you're okay with that, Anna.
Yes, thanks, Simone.
All right, and again, we apologize for the technical difficulties, and we're certainly available to answer more questions if there's a section that we were covering that was choppy with the audio and you didn't get the information you needed. Please reach out to us at a later date. Hopefully the slide will unfreeze and Anna can at some point advance to the Q&A. But if not, my email address is my first name, Simone, SIMONE, @jbay.org. And so you're welcome to reach out to me at a later date about the report. And we will be sending it out along with the slides and the recording that might be not the best recording, but at least you'll have the slides later today to everyone who registered for the web seminar. People have also asked about certificates of attendance. We can, I believe, send one to everyone through GoToWebinar or send the opportunity for you to request one from GoToWebinar to everyone who attended. I think an auto email goes out. There we go, Anna, I can see it now. An auto email goes out, I think 24 hours from the webinar. So let's jump into Q&A. So the first question, Amy, this one's for you. Earlier you talked about basic needs centers, but not everyone is familiar with what those are. Can you just say a few words about what a basic needs center is?
Yes. And even more than saying a little few words, there's a great publication that was recently released that talks about, really does explain what basic needs centers are. I think you might get different answers from different people, but in a nutshell, they were developed on college campuses in response to the really growing issue of homelessness among college students. And so about 1 in 5 community college students, 1 in 10 CSU students has an episode of homelessness over a year. And so a real way to say, if we're going to help these students succeed, we need to meet their quote unquote basic needs. So many of them start with some type of food pantry. They've gotten a lot more sophisticated than that, though. That is often a first step. Now they're offering a range of services, access to CalFresh, making more connections with the homeless response system. And so that's a little bit about what they are, but we'll make sure to include a link to really highlight some of the best ones across the state. The publication kind of explains what they are generally, gives a little bit of the legislative and budget history of them, and then highlights some of the really great practices that they have. And for those of you who are working with young people who are transitioning into higher education, knowing about the campus support programs, which is the specific program for foster youth on campus, often called Guardian Scholars, Renaissance Scholars, different names, Next Up, as well as the Basic Needs Center. I mean, these are two resources for young people that can make the difference between staying in college or not, and hopefully reducing that 20% of young people who at exit of the program have already dropped out of higher education.
Thanks, Amy. So someone asked the question, if a youth isn't eligible for AB 12, could they still be eligible for THP Plus? So the eligibility for extended foster care and for THP Plus is very similar. They both require youth to be in foster care or an out-of-home placement on their 18th birthday. So at that level, the eligibility is aligned. I mean, there are some nuances. AB 12 has participation conditions, whereas that are related to education and employment with exceptions. And then THP Plus, the eligibility requirements are really that youth are working toward the goals in their TILP, in their Transitional Independent Living Plan, which often are education and employment goals, but that is actually the eligibility. So Usually a youth is not going to be THP Plus eligible if they're not extended foster care eligible, but you know, those are what the eligibility parameters are for each of the programs. And so if that's helpful in kind of understanding that better, you know, hopefully that is. Do we know the percentage of youth who lost hours or employment, or whether they were able to apply and collect unemployment? So we didn't, unfortunately, we don't have data on whether youth were receiving unemployment that, you know, the benefits that we ask about, the standard kind of what's in the database doesn't include unemployment. And so that is not something that was included in the benefit slides, if that's what you're referring to. And so we don't know the, you know, the rate of unemployment benefits receipt. Amy or Anna, do either of you know of any research that's been done that shows whether foster youth have been accessing unemployment? I don't.
No.
This is Anna. There is a national survey that asked youth about unemployment and the also the stimulus checks and access to those, and it was low. And anecdotally, different groups have held focus groups nationwide about the difficulties of accessing those benefits and navigating the paperwork and those rejections. So it's just, I think the only thing we can say here is how critical it is to have support from, you know, supportive adults to navigate those benefits programs and access those, and make sure to get through all the different hurdles and not stop partway through or things like that. So that is what we know, and that survey I'm referring to is by Foster Club, and happy to share that with the person who asked the question.
Thanks, Anna. This question is, due to COVID, youth that have turned 21 or 25 have been extended to stay in THP and THP Plus, which is great. However, this has caused youth turning 18 or 21 needing THP or THP Plus to wait longer or continue waiting until a bed is available. What is the approach? So I'll answer, I think I'll tackle the part of that question that's clear to me. So the question about youth turning 21. So youth in THP Plus. So if a county has chosen to offer the THP Plus extension for youth that are in their program that would have been, you know, aging out of THP Plus or reaching their program maximum duration time, if they're allowing those youth to stay in the program, it seems like there's some concern that this would block the 21-year-olds from coming into the program. But the reason that this was offered, I think, you know, in the state budget is because it was offered simultaneously alongside the extended foster care extension. So while that THP Plus extension is happening in some counties, a mandatory extension in all counties of extended foster care is happening where youth are not leaving if they're turning 21. So there won't be this influx of 21-year-olds into THP Plus over this fiscal year. So we shouldn't see that issue popping up so much.
I think Simone, I think the question that's being raised is different. I think they're talking about young people who are entering extended foster care. And if young people, the question as to, you know, the capacity of THPNMD, if young people are remaining in extended foster care in THPNMD until June 30th, 2021, you know, will there be an expansion of the capacity of THPNMD? We don't have any data in the report to inform that. So it's probably best just to not speculate and move on.
Okay, I think it's a two-part question. I guess it's asking about two different age groups. So the next one is, we've already asked that one. What is your sense of people's receptivity to these recommendations? So that's a really great question. We certainly don't expect people to read this report or be on this webinar and then it's a magic wand and things change. You know, we produce this report with the idea of hoping that people will take the recommendations and then they'll think about how they can, in their local communities, you know, chip away at them, or if they work at the state level, do that at the state level. So we certainly turn to all of you, hoping that you will help, you know, come to the table, think about what we can do about the issues raised, and then potentially how we can implement some of these recommendations. And so there's another question here about the waiting list. So someone asked, could a youth be on, could they be on both waiting lists, both for THP Plus and THP-NMD? I think, you know, the answer to that question is that possible? Sure. Does that happen in all counties? Probably not. You know, we know that there's great variation in how waiting lists are managed across counties. And so there is no standardization where, you know, to answer that question. But certainly, I've heard of that happening. There's been times where youth are simultaneously on two waiting lists, kind of to have a backup plan. So it is certainly possible, but it would be something to inquire about at the local level. Another question related to waiting lists is, do we know the status of youth on the waiting list? So kind of asking, do we know, are youth on the waiting list experiencing homelessness? Are they in another foster care placement or in another program while on the waiting list? So we've been asked this question before. You know, we certainly don't have robust data on all of the youth status that are on the waiting list, but we do, you know, if we must kind of, if we consider the demographics of youth that are entering THP-NMD and THP Plus, and their experience of homelessness, we can kind of think about what youth on the waiting list might be experiencing. We know that, you know, based on data on youth entering the programs, at least 1 in 10 are experiencing homelessness before they enter THP-NMD, and then at least 16%, you know, are experiencing it before entering THP Plus. So that would be our best estimate on their kind of experience of homelessness while on waiting lists. Another question asked about the differences between the housing models. So just in the remote site versus the scattered site, and then the staffed site. So we touched on this a little bit earlier. I didn't get into detail. Basically, the scattered site model in THP Plus is referred to as the remote site model in THP-NMD. So these are pretty much the same housing model. And this is where a provider leases apartments in various, you know, locations throughout the community, sometimes in small clusters, and youth are, you know, it's the most independent of the three housing models, and there's mobile case management. The single site model refers to kind of one apartment building or complex or home owned or leased by the provider, where all the program participants live. And so for THP-NMD, there's a requirement that a staff resides on site, kind of like a resident advisor in a dorm. For THP Plus, that's not required. And then the host family model refers to an arrangement where the youth lives with a supportive adult, and they basically, you know, provide, host the youth. They provide room and board to the youth. So let's see, maybe do a couple more questions here. So someone said, do you know what counties are accepting program statements for THP-NMD review? Many of the counties this person's reached out to are not currently doing this. So your best bet is to reach out to any of the counties in your area using, you could go to our website. There's a rosters drop down from resources, and there is actually a county contact list for THP Plus. You could probably reach out to those point people at the county, and they could direct you, if they're not the right person for THP-NMD, to identify whether that county is providing or accepting program statements. So just trying to not repeat questions here. So this is a question about STRTPs. It says, Of the involuntary exits of NMDs, is there data on how many have come out of STRTPs or residential programs? I mean, it's a great question. We know there is not data. We don't know how many of the involuntary exits are specifically with youth that came from STRTPs, but we do know that nearly a quarter of youth coming into THPNMD are coming in from STRTPs. And one of our recommendations, and I can't recall if Anna got to it or if that was one of the ones we skipped, is to examine how we can better support youth that are coming from STRTPs, because the data does show that foster youth that have previous placement history in STRTPs are more at risk of homelessness. And so how we can kind of target certain populations that are more at risk to provide more kind of bolster the supports that are provided, particularly as they transition kind of in and out of the program. Well, we are at 11:30. We didn't get to every question, but again, if you want to reach out to us at a later date, my contact information is on the screen, and we're happy to answer questions. And thank you so much for sticking with us through all of the technical difficulties. I know that that's hard to listen to, and so we really appreciate you sticking with us. I hope everybody has a great rest of the week. Thanks. Bye-bye.